Welcome everyone to This Week in Svelte. I am Paolo, I will be your host, and today with me there is Stanislav.
Hello everyone.
I will refresh my window because as is saying I have logged in. So let's jump right into it because we have a lot to talk today. And let's begin with the changelog. So we don't have a changelog for SvelteKit today, but we have a bunch of Svelte changelogs because, as you may be aware, like there is Svelte 5 in the making. Obviously, we will not cover every Svelte 5 changelog because there will be a bunch, but we will cover whenever there is something much more interesting, a feature maybe. So let's start with Svelte 4.2.6, which, I mean, it was a basic bug fix to adjust the static attribute regex. So inside the Svelte compiler, there is these regex that allow you to see if there is a static attribute or not. And it had a problem, and now it doesn't have that problem anymore. This was also like a very similar fix was this one, because basically like there was when you had dynamic content inside an element and you were spreading attributes, there was a problem, and this like Svelte 4.2.7 fixed those. So those are like obviously the Svelte 4 releases nowadays are very small because we are much more concentrated on Svelte 5. So let's jump to Svelte 5. We have a couple of releases. One is very, very exciting because in Svelte 5.0.0 next 9, we have finally native TypeScript support. I mean, you may say, like, I already use TypeScript in Svelte, and it's true, but these are native TypeScript support even for the markup. So I don't know if you have ever had the problem that, I don't know, you are writing an on-click handler in line and you want to type it, like the event, and you can't right now in Svelte. Well, with these, you can use TypeScript. You can use TypeScript inside your markup. So this is a very cool thing.
This is really cool and very handy with stuff like const, right? When you're defining variables in the templates.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of times, I think, when you are defining, I don't know, a function or a variable, sometimes TypeScript still complains, obviously, inside your markup. So to solve TypeScript error, you had to move the function from inline to the script tag where you could use TypeScript and then do all of the stuff and then call the function. But I mean, it was a bit of a pain. And nowadays, like when you will use Svelte 5, you will get this for free. Another very cool feature that was added in Svelte 5.0.0 next 10, so the release after this, is that we now have effect.active rune. This seems to be like a silly rune, but basically these allow you to have to know if you are inside an effect, an active effect. And why do you need this? Well, with these, basically you can, like, this was basically added to allow to have something very similar to the start-stop notifier that we have nowadays in stores, but with runes. So if you create a custom function that uses runes, you can use these $effect.active inside it to create something very similar to the start-stop notifier. And we will share something about these sooner or later. So stay tuned in the next This Week in Svelte. So we don't have a SvelteKit release. Like a bunch, like the SvelteKit team is also very focused on the newly released enhanced image. So they are putting out a bunch of releases for that, but we are like also in the process of adapting SvelteKit to Svelte 5. So it's very, very cool.
Now that SvelteKit has reached 1.0, maybe we don't need a release every week, so it's good to see stability as well.
There will be probably, like, I bet that once we have Svelte 5, we will also have soonish a Svelte 2.0 release, because obviously, like, they will try to adapt to Svelte 5 at the best possible, like in the best possible way, by really make use of runes. But yeah, I mean, it's cool to finally have this interaction.
It sounds like a great future topic discussion. Like, what would you like to see in SvelteKit 2.0?
Yeah, that's very, very, very cool. We have to keep track of this because it's a very cool discussion that we can have. Let's move to we finished the changelog, so let's move to quick fact and announcement. So we have a small quick fact, a very quick fact, which is that automatic typing is back on SvelteKit. Speaking of which, with Svelte 5, because, like, I mean, you can use Svelte 5 with SvelteKit, and you can literally just use like $ props to write your plus page in Svelte 5. But to this day, there was not automatic typing. So if you are used to the niceties of already have end-to-end type safety, it was a bit of a pain because you had to import from $ types, and now you don't have to. So it's automatically added for you, which is very cool. So, very quick fact, and this gives us the possibility to introduce our guest for today community showcase. So please, a big round of applause for Sean, which it's the creator of Svelte UX and also Layer Chart, like that, right? Am I right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So those are very, very cool libraries for Svelte. I don't know how much, like, they are full of stuff. They are really like super concentrated, like full of stuff for Svelte, which is very, very cool, and we can't wait to hear about it. So I will remove my screen, I will add your screen, and you can, oh, sorry, this is Stanislav's screen, so feel free to share your screen, so that we can, like, leave the stage to today community showcase about.
There we go.
Svelte UX.
Pretty boring screen to start with. Let's hop up to something maybe a little funner to watch here for a minute. So I was going to open up with just kind of some background. My name is Sean Lynch, developer that lives in West Virginia in the United States. And as was mentioned, I created both Svelte UX and Layer Chart. Kind of back up a couple years. I started drinking the Svelte Kool-Aid, as I like to call it, back in 2021. I was working on and had been working on some React projects, and one particular for the last 5 years of that time frame. And we started experiencing a lot of performance issues, particularly with I needed to work within the constraints of React's minimalization model, using use memo, use callback, and all that. And it just became harder to even read the intent because of all that overhead. When I found Svelte and started reading the docs, I just had so many like aha moments, as I call them, that every page I'd flip to would be like, this solves this problem I'm running into, whether it's scope styles, whether it's the reactivity model, whether it's just the readability of things. So it just really, kind of drew me in. On top of that, I started learning about Tailwind and started to really actually see more than just kind of what I was reading, and really kind of came on board. So I started experimenting in the summer of 2021 to potentially move our startup to that, to Svelte. And we had a pretty big hole that we needed to fill, which was our component systems and our third-party dependencies that we relied on and everything. So at the time, we used a custom component library that was built on top of Material UI that a lot of people were using for React and still do. And we're also using Visix VISX for our visualizations. Full disclosure, I helped some with that. The Airbnb guys created that, and I was also fairly involved with that project as well. Started looking around at the Svelte component libraries and wasn't able to find something quite as robust at the time as Material UI. Now has since changed in the last 2.5 years, but at the time I had specific needs and use cases that I needed to support. That paired with kind of my continued deeper understanding of how to build these myself, I determined that the upfront effort spent to create a new component library would pay longer dividends down the road. I'd spend less time trying to figure out how to interact all the different third-party dependencies, how to do things in a React way versus just a web way that Svelte so much embraces, that I decided that it was worth kind of starting that project. Both those projects, both Svelte UX and Layer Chart. I was also very enticed with not having to stay up on top of everyone else's dependencies every time somebody bumps their dependency and it's a breaking change. I went through a couple Material UI changes that were fairly deep reaching, and so I felt it was a win for me personally to kind of start that project. And Svelte just feels so natural. It's so much closer to the DOM. So a lot of ways I didn't have to figure out how to do it within the framework. I just had to figure out how to do it within the web platform, and most of the time porting that into a Svelte way, so to speak, is almost transparent, and in some ways it very much is. So that's enough about the background. Let's kind of take a look at Svelte UX, which will be the main focus today. The main principles of Svelte UX are composition and customization. And its focus is to build a highly interactive and visual applications. I do a lot of work with healthcare analytics. I've actually been on 2 large startups recently since about 2017, and have leveraged this project for both of those. And a lot of interactivity, a lot of transitions. It's very much an application as opposed to a site-based type of use case. To get started, let's just kind of go through the docs here. Our docs probably could use a bit of a refresher here. We walk you through how to set up basically Tailwind at the start. But to be honest, there's a couple other better approaches to kind of get that first building block set up. If you go through the official Tailwind documentation, they show you kind of their recommendations and approaches to setting up Tailwind within a SvelteKit application, leveraging things like the Vite preprocess, and then just having it scan your content. Even further down that, you can also leverage something like Svelte Add to very quickly basically do what the Svelte the Tailwind docs are telling you to do, but in a single command line. Going even further, we had a wonderful contribution by Jean-Yves that added a CLI command line interface, so we can npm create svelte-ux at latest, just like you would like a regular Svelte project. Run this, it'll prompt you for a name. We'll say like this week in Svelte. It'll ask you for a template. We currently have a couple just simple templates, basically getting your dependencies and your Tailwind config in place. We'll go with the starter template, and that's it. Then we can change into that project. We'd have to install the dependencies. I don't know if we want to sit through this right now, but start this and then do an npm run dev or pnmp or yarn, and you're up and running there. Even further, if you just want to kind of experiment with it on a README on the repository, Jean-Yves has also set us up with Svelte Lab, StackBlitz, and Code Sandbox shortcuts. So these can very quickly, if you just want to feel around, even test out use cases, these are great, especially in our Discord, to like share an example of something. So this has been a very good way to kind of just get up to speed and kind of get that initial pieces in place. If we go back to our official docs here, the only thing to kind of highlight in the Tailwind config is you want to make sure that it's scanning this Svelte UX component structure, and this is true of any other component library that leverages Tailwind, like Skeleton. And then we also at the moment we have an accent color, which helps you kind of control the various accents, whether it's like your checkbox and radio style colors, your highlights around your text fields. I'm actually in the process of, as I like to call it, CSS variableizing everything into design tokens, similar to like a Skeleton and a Daisy UI, and Shad CN and all these other ones that will give you a lot of capability to style things just by changing some CSS variables. But right now we just do have at least a way to kind of at a high level change your color schemes out. And there's a lot of customizations that you can do beyond here that we'll get into. And then lastly, we have a Tailwind plugin, and this does a few things for us. It adds elevation classes as opposed to using shadow, which is a single box shadow. We have kind of the more recommended approach for realistic shadows, which are multi-level. There's usually 3 shadows, and this article by Josh is great to kind of explain like, what makes a good shadow versus just like a typical shadow. So our plugin adds that capability, and we use that within our components, but you can also use it in your projects as well. And it adds a few other just niceties with dealing with like grid stacking and scroll bar customizations and stuff. That's probably enough about the getting started section here. The last thing to kind of point out is most everything is available as a top level import, and each component will document this. So typically when you go reach for this, if you need the button or a form or whatever it might be, you'll pull it off the top level. We do have a lot of things in this library. There are over 100 components, actions, and stores, maybe even pushing 200 at this point. All of those are available top level. We also have a lot of utility classes, and there are some documented at the very bottom here that we'll get into, but there are additional ones that we don't currently expose at the top level imports. And just kind of know that they're there. You might see those referenced, or you might even start browsing the repository and say, oh, this is really nice. We haven't exposed those just yet. One, to keep the top level exports from not being overly polluted, but also to help kind of allow us to refine those APIs and maybe expose the best, what makes the most sense. Now to get into customization, along with those design tokens, which I think is going to open up a large, capability with minimal effort. We also support a lot of very granular customizations. We already talked about the accent color, which is just kind of a very broad way to change out your main colors. Each component takes in both class and classes, and classes allow you to then target inner elements and apply styling there. So, if there's just something like, oh, I really need to access, for example, the icon on this button, you can target it very directly. This is also TypeScript. So you'll get all that auto completion to know which, basically sub elements or components are available to do styling. We also have our own kind of wrapper around Tailwind merge, which allows you to apply those classes, and the last one wins. So you can kind of like not fight, which is kind of a one thing that you'll run into on occasion. Really helps the whole class precedence ordering. Going a step further, we have settings, and one of the main settings is themes. So just as much as you can pass these classes explicitly when you are using those components, you can also do this globally at a theme level, which is just another way for you to kind of make all those customizations in one spot and they apply everywhere. You might want to increase your border thicknesses or your radiuses, and this is the way to do it at the moment. And you can do, just like with Tailwind, some very targeted capability through this mechanism. We also expose another wonderful contribution by Jean-Yves was our formatting, which we'll get into later, but long story short, you can format numbers and globally define that to specify your locale, your currency, and then everywhere that you use our format util, they'll all be in that locale and currency. And we have a lot of other presets beyond just, for example, like currencies and decimals, integers, percentages, and so forth. this is just a kind of a high level class precedence of how things get applied. The components themselves have some built-in base classes. They also expose very different variants, and we'll see a couple examples of those with, like, for example, our button component. It might be filled or outlined or lightly filled, or maybe even no base styles at all. Those are applied at first, and then secondly is then the variant classes. Next are the theme classes that we defined, just mentioned up above, and then those class prop that you pass, and then lastly class. So the last one wins, and this just gives you a lot of very granular capability to tweak things that may look differently than what they do kind of out of the box. We also apply a component name to your class, or to each component. And this makes it really easy for both when you're looking at things in DevTools and you want to kind of see that structure. You've got that nice class name to kind of see that defined. You're not just seeing a bunch of divs or a bunch of just markup. You can say, okay, this belongs to a button or a table or whatever it might be. You can also leverage that for kind of global styling as well. The docs actually make use of this at the moment. And this is just some examples of like how you can pass some variants through here. And you can use those variants to also target those within your theming, which is really nice if you want to change a specific variant type styles. Once again, I think these design token work that I'm working on will hopefully improve this further. But there's a lot of different ways to hopefully support a lot of different use cases, which is my hope. And then lastly, another thing to mention here is there are a lot of slots. So a lot of ways, if you, for example, want to change the icon that's being rendered and control the markup, we also expose a lot of the slots, both name slots and default slots. So you can kind of break glass, so to speak, and insert that. And with Svelte UX's primary directive being composition, is usually you can expose that or use that slot, but still recompose the same pieces that were being used underneath the hood, but with even further control. Whether you need to pass some props that you don't have access to, you want to throw a Svelte action on that component, so you have raw access to that that underlying DOM node. Just gives you more capability there. Okay, that's probably enough for just kind of the getting started and customization. Let's kind of dig into the docs, and I'm going to just jump to a random page at first. First thing to know about the docs is up in the top section here is we show you the source of that component. So if you just want to see how it's made, you can click on here and you can see exactly what is being done underneath the hood. If, for example, you want to deep link to this, if you're submitting an issue or you're talking about this on Discord, you can also click on the view on GitHub and open up that component here, and then you can quickly like highlight some lines here and send a link and go from there. Along with the actual component source, we also show you the page source of the documentation itself. So if you need to see exactly kind of how one of these examples is created, particularly up in the script section, you can dig into that, and same thing, you can open that up in GitHub. Each example, and I'm a firm believer of kind of showing by example. So a lot of the docs are very example rich. You can click on show code and see that example's specific makeup. There's also a quick copy to clipboard buttons for everything in here. So those are kind of good things to know. And then also there's on this page kind of just table of contents if you want to jump down to a specific section, for example. And then lastly, or a couple other things to add, is each component, if we scroll to the very bottom, you'll see a related section. And this will kind of show you everywhere that this component is either used or that you might want to, like, if this doesn't fit your need, you need to go find something else. We've been building out this catalog as well to help you say, oh, I'm using this component, but I wish it did this. Well, there might be another component that does that use case as well. And if you click on this, it'll jump you over to that component. There's also search up here, which is available via Command K, and you can jump around if you want to look for every field that we have exposed in the library, or everything that involves dates, for example. It's a quick search away. Okay, let's get into some of these components to kind of highlight some of the functionality. App layout is kind of the very high level, like what you'll kind of reach for first if you want some assistance with your layouts. And what app layout does is it helps control your header, your side nav, and your main content responsively as well. So it controls the ability to toggle away your navigation, or for example, if you're on a small viewport, it goes into responsive and it will then become an overlay on top. So it just helps facilitate that. It also enables the ability to stack your header underneath your content if you want to have that nice blurry background. That case is supported as well. So it's kind of that fundamental piece. Going through here, there's settings as well. Traditionally, you'll use settings as a was highlighted in customization, where you will use it as kind of a set context type imperative, or I guess imperative syntax. But you can also use it as a component, and this is nice if you want to, for example, contextually scope some of these styles to a specific part of your site or part of a page. So you have that same capability of controlling those settings, but you might want to do your admin pages separately from like your primary marketing content, and this opens up that capability. Or for example, with our formatting based off of your locale, you could have your settings wrap your SvelteKit routes that are, for example, English versus French versus German, and apply that theming contextually based on those routes. From here on, I'm just going to kind of bounce around, kind of give you some highlights. There's a lot to cover, and I don't want to exhaust my time here. But the button component, for example, is a pretty good example of different ways that variants can be used. You can see we have outline and fill, fill light. So it's just a good example, even just straight text when you want to kind of have most of that capability removed. It also helps show compositionally. So if we go to button group and we expand this out, the same variant capability is available for our buttons, but we can do it at a group level, which gives us this nice, collected together actions. It might be, for example, if you scroll down, the kind of the Google Docs, text alignment type input. You can adjust the styling. You can even go down here and kind of get the the GitHub star type display as well. Or going further, you could have secondary menus. This could be your primary action, and this could be like additional actions. And if we look at the example here, we can see how each of those is kind of compositionally created. We have our primary button target, which is on the left. We have then a toggle component, which I'll get into, but this is for some state management that also Svelte UX does. And then within it, we have our chevron button on the side, which then triggers our menu to open and close. And we have our various menu items in here. Not the most visually aesthetic example, but kind of give you the principles. Just to kind of jump through, our icon component also tries to be pretty robust. It supports the traditional way of pulling in paths from component libraries like material design icons, font awesome. And if we look up at the source of the page, you can see, I'm importing a couple examples from material design icons. I'm pulling an example from font awesome, and these paths can then be referenced within our component itself. So if I close this out, this first example here is using one via that NPM library. You can also pass pure SVG to the icon component, or read that from a URL, which is rather nice, and it will also cache and only send one in-flight request to pull that. So if you have this same icon, for example, defined in your database, or defined somewhere that you want to pull in the whole library up front, but you want the user to be able to select an icon, it supports that use case. And then lastly, you can also define just inline SVG markup as well, and it will handle standardizing that with how it can be styled and so forth. You can change icon styles, you can theme it or style it a lot of different ways. This kind of gets way down into capabilities of control. I try to show you a lot of examples, even for example, like multiple paths and how to style two paths separately, applying some transformations, animations, just using the built-in Tailwind classes. and you can extend these as well, or having tooltips as well. So probably enough about icons. Another really popular component is our fields. Field itself is the base. All a field really is a container to handle some highlighting and some control, and you can stick whatever you want in our field. It might be a switch, for example, to toggle things on and off. Might be a collection of checkboxes. You might have an error state. We also have a toggle component with various multiple variants. And basically anything you want to have in the look of a field, but you want to have more control there, that's available. Typically, though, you'll use one of our kind of higher abstraction components like text field. Text field is very specific for text entry. Kind of runs through a bunch of the use cases here. A couple to highlight is, for example, way down here, you see a lot of examples. It supports multiple input types, for example. So, this can take in only a number without any, alpha. So if I try to type in alpha, A, B, C, D, it won't take. This is basically just controlling the underlying input underneath the hood. If we go down to masking, I think I have some masking examples in here. Yeah. So this also supports masking. So you could say, okay, I need a date in here. Christmas this year. You can do a lot of masking. This same, back to the compositional side of things, is underneath the hood. This is using our input component. So if we go to input, you can see a whole bunch of masking examples taken in, for example, like phone numbers, credit cards, MAC addresses, or just any kind of alphanumeric type input. So once again, you could use input and field and basically do a lot of what text field can do, but then text field gives that higher level abstraction that you're probably going to use 80-90% of the time. But we try to give you those building blocks when you need to quote unquote break glass and customize and do some stuff that maybe we haven't thought of before, or that would then give us another use case to try to find a good way to show an example or given a better abstraction for. Another kind of unique thing that Svelte UX does is a lot of state management for you. And I'm going to scroll way down here. Let's go find, actually, I might have missed it. Pagination here. Let's see. There it is. So, a lot of times you need to paginate some data. You need to step through it. There are a couple building blocks of pagination. There's the actual pagination display, and you can see, pretty configurable different use cases. If you want to control your per page stepping, just general layout, throwing some actions on the side. But on top of it, you then need to paginate the data itself. If you're doing client-side pagination, this component here is what helps you with it. So you hand it your overall collection, and then it gives you both the items on that page as well as then the pagination store that you then hand to your pagination component to then control, like, okay, next page, previous page, jump to page, etc. Another really popular or very useful component, you'll see it in the docs a lot, is the toggle component. And this does state management. All it really is doing underneath the hood, if we look at the source of it, is it's very simple. It's got a Boolean that allows you to toggle either on, inverse of the current state, or explicitly turn it on or off regardless of that state, and exposes that. And it's something as simple as this might be. In practice, I make great use of this all the time. If we look in our related section, we can see, for example, it's used for dialogue and drawers and menus, and even a toggle button. If we go to dialogue and we see this example, you'll see that that toggle component store wraps our button in our dialogue. And then every time we click on the button, it will trigger the toggling of that. And then based on the display, whether we're open or not, it will then display the dialogue for us. So this is really nice, especially instead of having to set like a bunch of variables up in your script and then having to have like, dialogue 1, dialogue 2, or whatever those might be. You can do things very, at the site of which things are being managed. And there's a lot of these components beyond just toggle that do this. If we go back to toggle, for example, we have form state, which also does Zod schemas, managing selections. So it's managing this right here for us. So a lot of state type components, and I kind of want to just kind of give you a taste of like the various type categories that are out there, and then you can explore later, since there's be a whole lot to cover. Another kind of popular component is our date components, and I'm gonna jump specifically to date range. So with date range, we can specify our different period types. We might be selecting, for example, days and say, some date range. We might be picking, for example, months and, or even calendar or fiscal years. And then we have presets for each of these period types. And you might say, okay, the last 3 months or last 6 months or month to date. And you can configure all of this. You can specify which presets you want, which period types you want to expose. It's also responsive. So if we break it down, it will jump into a responsive layout to hopefully be mobile friendly. The component also handles, for example, stepping. So if we scroll down here, and I'm going to pick, for example, like last week and hit OK. I've currently selected last week. We can go back to the prior weeks just by stepping through those weeks and back forward. So this can be really quick, even to not have your users even have to pull up that dialogue, just to walk through some ranges. And that works with everything. If we switch this to, for example, month, and we say the current month and hit OK, we can then jump through each month. Pull this back up here. Let's see what else we got here. I'm going to just jump around. We have duration. This is a nice way to kind of show some of our stores that are being leveraged. So there is a timer store, which we can look at more in detail, but this leverages that timer store to then update a duration, on every tick. And if you look at the source, we'll see right here that timer store being leveraged directly. And then ultimately it just formats out our duration for us and then renders it out. But this is kind of useful to render either a pre-calculated start and end range, or okay, we started running this, now hit start. You can then have that timer start counting up for you, so that elapsed time has occurred after so long. Let's jump to some of the more funner ones to look at here. Scrolling value, which is down in our motion section. This allows you to scroll a value based on an axis. So we can either scroll left to right, and we can jump 10 at a time. We can also scroll vertically. We can either do them all together. We can do them by individual values, which is what this shows here. So we can have the ones places and the tens places and the hundreds places changing separately from one another. You can also format those. So if we should reset this back, and I've got keyboard entry set up on this. So if I hit up, it'll jump through the values. And here we can see just jumping through the Roman numeral values. We'll count to 10 here. If I hold down Shift, I can then jump up, count 10 at a time, and kind of run through all the Roman numerals, and we can see how it's translated. This example shows you how to format alpha. So based on those index positions, we can then show a scrolling list. You'll see this a lot of times on like the front page of some marketing sites. So you can format this into an alpha representation of that, which is similar to what the Roman example is doing. Going even further, you can also use it to do direction aware displays of components. Let me switch this back to X. I think it might look better here. So if we want to like step through, for example, month ranges and have them slide across, all that's being handled for you by the scrolling value. Next, I'm going to jump to spring value. And under the hood, you'll notice it's very simple. It's basically a wrapper around the Svelte built-in Spring store. But where this becomes really helpful is you can wrap a value that is not a Spring value and have it be Spring enabled. And if I jump to a layer chart example, this is a really good example right here. So if we dig into the page source and I go show you, sorry, I'm scrolling around a good bit. We're using a Svelte UX range field that's binded to that value. If this is a Spring value, you couldn't do that. It just doesn't work well. And I've got some, some Svelte REPL examples we could kind of dig into. But what's nice is that this can still be defined as a standard value way up here. It's just a standard number. And if we jump all the way back down, we take that value and pass it to Spring value. Then it gives us a new value that we can then kind of shadow within here. And it will then be Spring tweened between its various states. And to see that in practice, if I click around, you can see how both this number and the value adjust accordingly. So Spring value as well as tween value, if you want to have explicit durations and explicit easing curves, then both of those are very helpful. I use these a lot in presentations or a lot in my reports that I create, because it's very nice to see what changed as opposed to all the numbers being updated on the screen immediately. It can be useful to kind of see both what changed and how much it changed, so to speak. So there's also tween value. There's tilt, which you've probably seen. You might have seen these examples in like CodePen. This does just some nice fancy effects to kind of like add a little extra features to it, which is kind of a good segue for our effects library. These are components. These are using SVG filters underneath the hood to kind of do a couple cool effects. If we expand this one out, you'll see I'm using a timer store, which is like we looked at earlier with duration, which does basically a set interval wrapper, and it will unmount and remount every time that value changes some new word in that collection. And when those are fading in and out based on our blurring, the GUI component changes that blur effect into a more GUI effect. And we could always get down in the weeds down the path, but ultimately an SVG filter will look at the blurring with a threshold and say, if the amount of opacity is at a certain level, it's fully opaque, else it's fully transparent. So you can leverage that concept to then create some pretty cool effects. Even things like morphing emojis, which is pretty cool. Rounded backgrounds, which you can edit this. This is an example. Oops. And have a dynamic wrapped text background. You can do some pretty cool like loading effects, and you can adjust the amount of quote unquote gooiness, so to speak, to see how that looks. Similarly, just a scanning dot back and forth, or even having some dots kind of converge together into a unified mass and back out. And there's just an example, like kind of see it in effect when you get close enough what it does. Another pretty popular effect is the shine effect. And based on your mouse cursor, as it applies a basically an SVG filter light that creates a pretty cool effect. And it works with emojis, especially ones that have like a lot of roundness and holes in it. I think it looks pretty cool. I initially saw this on Twitter and basically had to learn how it was made and was kind of enamored by it. I saw this effect here with these, kind of Halloween styled emojis that look pretty cool. You can do even simple things like, for example, wrap the button component in a shine, and then all of your buttons become shiny. Very minimal effort. I have an example of kind of how that works underneath the hood if I can find it. So the filter is basically doing this, and then we can compositionally apply both of those together. But it's providing those accents and those shadows for you. And then by composing it with the original source, it adds that, that basically that free depth effect with very little effort. And once again, I encourage you to look at the source. Just some component or some properties or some props to configure it. But at the end of the day, it's an SVG filter doing some blurring. And then this is really the workhorse, which is the specular highlight or the specular lighting to apply that cool effect based on the settings that you passed in with a little bit of mouse tracking. And then anything you put in this slot then basically becomes shiny, which is, I think, pretty awesome to do. That's all the components to kind of run through. There's a whole lot of actions, just a couple quick ones. There's data background. and I'll sort these values. So this is just a way to apply like some gradient structuring or shading for values. Really useful in the table component. In fact, if we jump to table, you'll see once again another compositional example of how that's being used. And I know I'm running low on time. We have, for example, like mouse actions. So it does things like, draggable. You can do it with pixel snapping. So it's clicking into place. It can also be based off of percentage snapping. So it's jumping every 10% all the way across. You can lock it down to a specific axis if you want to. There's effects like Spotlight, which allows you to provide some pretty cool mouse aware styling. I use this on my personal site. Sticky and Table, which are some of my workhorses that I use a ton and actually need to improve the docs on pretty greatly, but handles a lot of position sticky type use cases for you. And then to get down into just a couple of the store examples, there is, scrolling the wrong screen here. For example, Promise Store is really useful in SvelteKit when you have some stream data that's coming down to you as a promise and you want to, kind of convert that promise into a store. If we see an example of that here, this SvelteKit data is coming down on this streamed object called activities, which is being fetched for us via our load function. And by wrapping that in a promise store, then setting that promise so if it were to change, on page navigation, it updates, then we have some nice capability of reading the data once it's available, changing some loading state. So if we look down here, actually the loading might be done higher up, but it improves kind of that use case. You could also do await statements in Svelte as well. There's a couple ways to do things. Not get too tied up here. Let's see. That's probably good. The timer store has some nice examples on how that can be leveraged. I use that a lot in the docs. Another good example of kind of seeing where it's used. Scrolling value is an example where if I start this timer right here, it starts ticking down, and you can see it's just watching that timer and handing that value as it ticks down. We can hit stop, we can hit restart, and it all transitions back. And then the last thing I'll highlight is this wonderful contribution by Jean-Yves, which is our format that he's enabled to do locales and currencies. So if we format one of our presets or styles like currency, this is the US English version. If we switch that to, for example, French, but still in dollars, you can see how that is changed. Decimals become commas, comma, thousands places become a Unicode space. And if we switch that to example, a euro, it all updates dynamically. And there's some other use cases here. So I could talk about this for a long time, and layer chart as well. It's a whole other, quote unquote beast of a component library. But, I think that's, want to make sure I haven't overstayed my welcome. So I'll pass it back to the team here and see if anybody's got any questions that you want me to kind of, add to here.
I am muted. Very, very cool. As I've said, like every time I jump on the documentation, it's amazing how many things you stuffed into this library. It's a pretty interesting choice about the fact that usually a component library just provide components, like building block for things, but like the amount of things that you have told, like even just these effect components, the stores, all the things that are very there are much more niceties inside a website, because very often you are building a component library for internal tools, something that don't need a lot of fancy thing, but the fact that you have those fancy things, you might just as well use them even in internal tool, which is always nice. I would enjoy an internal tool that like have shiny button, for example. So very, very cool. And I recommend.
This is very, very impressive, and just you fit so much stuff in there. Not only the components themselves, but also the documentation is incredibly good and so like well thought out with all the related components and quick search and all the demos and the source.
Yeah.
It's very impressive.
Absolutely.
Let's see if the chat has any questions.
I have highlighted one comment because I agree with him. Because I guess this is going to be a lot of fun migrating all of these to Svelte 5. I guess like Svelte 4 is completely, like Svelte 5 is completely back compatible to Svelte 4. So there's no real need to migrating it. But yeah, I mean, it's a lot of work, but I guess like it would be a fun challenge.
It is on the roadmap for sure. So, and our thought is right now we're pre 1.0 for both Svelte UX and layer chart, just to give us. I've been using it in production on two big products now for over 2 years, but that just kind of gives us the capability to have some polishing, breaking changes, tighten up some prop names or just some general refinements and a couple additional features like the design tokens. I really don't want that in before 1.0. With that said, the plan is for 1.0 to be completely compatible with Svelte 3, 4, and 5. And then we start looking at like the 2.0 versions and maybe start embracing some Svelte 5 capabilities. Like they solve watching the Svelte 5 announcements. I've personally felt some of those things that have been fixed. So I'm super happy for it or super excited for it. And I think when 2.0 of these libraries will embrace the capability and hopefully maintain compatibility backwards. But that's kind of one of those things that will take probably the most amount of time is trying to find where we can embrace Svelte 5 capabilities and simplifications of some stuff without, requiring everybody to move to 5. But luckily, anybody that's on a 3 or 4 code base can switch to 5 practically invisibly, just like with 3 to 4. It was very, very minor changes. And only if you were doing, some specific stuff with like transitions.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I guess like most of the watcher will definitely try out Svelte UX. And I'll see you around because I mean we are in the same Svelte community. Bye, Sean.
Yeah, thanks so much for presenting, Sean.
Appreciate the opportunity. Thanks, guys.
Okay, let's move to another to question and answer. And I think one question that we have, and I mean I hope and I think Stanislav here will have the answer, is how to set up Socket.io with SvelteKit. This is a very interesting topic because we live in a world where we are using a bunch of serverless services. So I guess Socket kind of got the short hand of the stick for this because obviously without a long living server you can't really use sockets, but there are still a bunch of people that use services like fly.io or I mean even Heroku, something like this, that still use the node adapter for SvelteKit, and they might want to know how to set up Socket.io. So please share your screen. I will add it to the stage and let's see how you can.
Yeah, thanks for handing it over, Paolo. Like you mentioned, Socket.io is a real-time library. I think it uses WebSockets by default, but I think it can use other transports as well. But this little demo was spurred by this question that I have up on screen, which was asking how do you share a Socket.io instance between SvelteKit and since WebSocket doesn't work natively in SvelteKit, you have to maybe you want to still somehow share them. So this brought me down a rabbit hole of trying to understand how best to make it work, and I made this little demo repo that I'm gonna send out a link to that, and actually I can do it right away. So this repo implements the getting started chat that Socket.io has as their kind of starter tutorial. and I can just I can show you how it looks before we start to dig in a little bit into the code. So here I have the repo set up, and I have started the server, and I'm going to go ahead and load up 2 tabs. And I'm going to go to the localhost 3000, which is the production port. And here we have a beautiful chat UI. This is not me who made, this is the Socket.io guide. And let's see if I write something in one. We see it actually gets sent in both of the tabs, even though they are completely different tabs and can be users in completely different places. So as we see, everything works. It's very, very fast. And so let's have a look at how this works internally. So there are a few guides to how to get Socket.io running, but I think there are no guides to show how to use it from inside SvelteKit, because the problem you have, the way you integrate it is by using this custom server functionality that exists in the node adapter. So if you go to the docs page here about node servers, they show you how to kind of use SvelteKit as a middleware itself, and then you can attach other stuff using Express. For example, a WebSocket server. But how can we, when we create this WebSocket server, how can we send it into our SvelteKit application to be used there? So let's have a look here. This is basically the example from the docs, but I have added the Socket.io server here. So I'm creating the server, and this is what you need basically to get Socket.io working, and then you need to attach it to your server so that the real-time routes, like the chat is being sent over, actually works. But in order to actually use it from SvelteKit, we need to do one more thing, which is actually to pass the instance that we just created, IO, which is this Socket.io instance. We can actually pass it in through the request object. And this is locals. This is not SvelteKit locals, actually. This is, even though they are named the same, these are Express locals, and they work on a slightly different level. So what we do here is when every request that comes through, we're going to attach the IO instance, the Socket.io instance, on request locals. And that's going to let us do some really cool things. And so for this demo, what I did was I actually, when you submit this form, this chat message, it actually submits through SvelteKit forms. So let's have a look at how this chat component actually works. So let's go to the chat component here. And here we have we list all the different messages. And here we have the actual form that submits the message. And this actually uses a form action. So it doesn't just emit. You could just emit the message to the Socket.io instance, but in order to show the SvelteKit integration, it's being done through form actions now. So how does this actually work? Let's look at the form action when a message comes in. So here we have pretty standard stuff. So we have this request form data. That's going to be this text that we send to the chat. But then we have this line here where we reach into this variable you get into into the load function and also into server actions that is called platform. And from here, we can actually reach this request object, which we attached the Socket.io instance on. So what this allows us to do is we can actually, on the same object that we created up on the top level up here, when we initialized the app, we can actually emit a message through it. So what actually happens is after you submit the form, the message is actually streamed down in the real-time connection. So when you send the message, it's being sent just as a form. But when you get the message on your screen, it actually is sent over the real-time connection that Socket.io has. And this is quite nice because you can, for example, do do authentication checking like you would normally do from SvelteKit. You can use your library imports, and this is something that I don't think you could do before in some of these examples that have been available. So that's basically it. There's a little bit you have to change the types a little bit. So we can go to like the types, and you can see here that I added, because SvelteKit isn't aware of this new variable that I've injected. So I have created on the platform interface, I have added this request locals IO, which I've typed to be the socket IO server. So I also get nice code completion there as well. So I hope that if you're interested in trying out to do some like real-time stuff, you can you can check out this repo. And I hope if you have any questions, go ahead and ask them.
Yeah, in the meantime, I want to say, like, very interesting, especially like I naively assumed that like the requests that you get inside the Express server would be the same request that you get inside SvelteKit, and I would have been wrong. So interesting to see that like you can access the request from Express inside platform, which is like one of the more obscure things that you get inside your request event in SvelteKit, because it's actually, as the name suggests, is platform dependent. So for example, Vercel could add something inside this platform object. I think one platform that make actually use of this platform object is Cloudflare, that like provide you a hook into, for example, their storage through this platform object. I don't know if I remember correctly, but it should be.
Yeah, I think just to add like what the problem is, because when you're out here, when you're in the like server.js, which is at the very top level, even before you load SvelteKit, there is like no way to if you don't do this passing, there's no way to actually access the same server.io socket.io instance. So you're gonna, if you just create a new server here, that's gonna be like a different server than the one you have out here. So you're not gonna be able to emit the events in a nice way from SvelteKit, and and then when you're out here, like this part in server.js, it's not actually bundled with Vite, so you don't have like your lib imports, you don't have like all your libraries. So it's that's why it's a nice feature to be able to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we have some question. This is probably the most common question that everybody gets when it's showcasing this code, and it's what VS Code color theme. Like, I mean, Bagak is asking what your VS Code.
Yeah, no, I will accept it. I think it is. Let's see. I think it is a theme that I have. It's called Monokai Pro is the theme. Yeah, so if you like that, and they have a bunch of different themes.
Yeah,
if you want to check it out.
Okay, well, I guess like if there are no questions, we can like commence to like close this week in Svelte, which was very cool and very full of information, and we hope to see even more information in this week in Svelte. We hope to bring you new news about new release, and we all want new like toys to play with with Svelte 5. So thank you everyone for joining in. We hope we entertained you and informed you, and see you guys next week. Bye everyone.
See you.